Okay, welcome everyone to our 27th seminar of the Centre of Research Excellence in Aphasia Recovery and Rehabilitation Seminar Series. It's evening in Australia and morning in the UK, so if you haven't joined us for a seminar before, welcome. I'm John Pearce, a postdoctoral researcher at the Aphasia CRE and co-facilitator of the seminar series. First of all, La Trobe University acknowledges that this event and many of our participants are located on the lands of many traditional custodians in Australia. Today I'm on Boonwurrung land, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us online today. Today we're lucky to be hearing from Dr. Madeline Cruice and Dr. Lucy Dipper from City University of London about the LUNA project, a novel discourse intervention for mild to moderate aphasia. Before I introduce Dr. Cruice and Dr. Dipper, I'm just going to cover a few brief points. Firstly, if you haven't already done so, please join us as a member of the Aphasia CRE, and you can do that by going to our website and signing up. We welcome people with aphasia, their family and friends, health professionals, researchers and organisations. Benefits to members include a regular newsletter, updates about events and activities, contributions to research, networking opportunities and more. And the CRE is always looking for financial support, so if you wish to donate, please see our website for details. Please note that the seminar today is being recorded and past webinar videos are available via our Aphasia CRE website. You just need to click on the resources tab. And also on the resources tab, we've included a directory of aphasia-friendly COVID-19 resources, which is still very much relevant at the end of 2021. Please engage with us on social media today via Twitter or Facebook, and feel free to tweet along and use the hashtag AphasiaCRE. Now, throughout the seminar today, please use the question and answer function on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You can enter your question for Dr. Cruice and Dr. Dipper at any time throughout the presentation. And you'll also be able to see questions asked by other audience members. If you see a question that you like, just like it or upvote it to show those of most interest to the group. Lucy and Madeline will answer as many questions as time allows at the end of the presentation, but please reserve that Q&A space for questions rather than comments and try to keep the questions brief. All right, it's my privilege and honour today to introduce Drs. Madeline Cruice and Lucy Dipper. Dr. Madeline Cruice is an Associate Professor at City University of London and member of the City Aphasia Lab. She's a speech pathologist and clinical researcher focused on achieving meaningful change in communication and broader life outcomes for people with post-stroke aphasia. Her completed and current research projects include Communicate, EVA Park Group Support, Read It, INCA, STARS and LUNA, and New Communication Partner Training for Family Dyads, an NIHR-funded project. She's a member of the International Collaboration of Aphasia Trialists, previously the lead for Societal Impact and Reintegration Working Group, and represents the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists in the UK Stroke Forum, promoting the profession in stroke rehabilitation. Madeline is keen supporter of clinical academics in speech pathology as a panel chair for the NIHR Clinical Doctoral Research Fellowship Scheme in England, as well as supporting her own postgraduate doctoral researchers. She's published widely. And Dr. Lucy Dipper is a linguist working in the field of speech and language therapy, exploring the best ways to assess and remediate communication disorders. She works with the language needed for communication in everyday life, such as storytelling and other forms of discourse. Everyday language requires analysis and intervention at various levels of language, including word, phrase, sentence, and discourse structure levels. And her research is directed at creating feasible methods for clinicians to achieve this. Lucy joined City University of London in 2000 and previously worked at University College London. She studied linguistics at Sussex University and then undertook both her master's and PhD in clinical linguistics at University College London. Lucy's research investigates the ways in which people use language and gesture to communicate meaning in everyday life, including ideas, experiences, interests, beliefs, opinions, and other aspects of identity. So I'll now hand over to Madeline and Lucy to hear more about LUNA, a novel discourse intervention for people with mild to moderate aphasia.
Thank you very much, John. Maddie's just getting our slides up. We want to just start by saying thank you very much for inviting us. We were delighted to be invited and particularly grateful for you altering the timeline for us so that we could start at a reasonable hour in the UK. So our social media handles are there. So as John said, please tweet along with the Aphasia CRE hashtag, but you can also have a look at our accounts as well. And so we're here to tell you about LUNA today on behalf of the team. So you might be wondering, what is LUNA? And this might have been the first thing that sprung to mind. But LUNA is actually an acronym, which you won't be surprised to hear, particularly as you will have heard all the acronyms in Maddie's bio there for her projects. We're very fond of an acronym at City. So LUNA stands for Linguistic Underpinnings of Narrative in Aphasia. And LUNA is a project looking at both assessment and treatment in discourse for people with aphasia. So it's an innovative, creative and empowering approach. And we're aiming to support people with aphasia to tell their own personal stories. So LUNA involves integrating personalised therapy at the word, sentence and discourse level. And the idea is to provide people with flexible language tools to empower them to improve their personal stories. So we work with a big team. There are two slides showing our team. First of all, these are the originals, the OGs. So at the top there is the research team, Nicola Botting, Jane Marshall, myself, Madeline and Madeline Pritchard from City, and then Mary Boyle from the States and Deborah Hirsch from Perth. And then on the right of the screen is Kate Swinburne, who was a project manager who joined us halfway through the LUNA project. And then we have two really important teams at the bottom, our advisory group of speech and language therapists on the left, and our advisory group of people with aphasia on the right. And you'll be hearing more about them later. And then we've got the second half of our team who became really important when COVID interrupted our plans. So we have two assessors at the top of the screen on the left, and below them are our speech and language therapists. And then we've got Rachel Barnard and Becky Moss, who did some qualitative analysis for us. And then we have this huge team of students who helped with the therapy, students who helped with the transcription of the stories, and students who helped us check the treatment fidelity. So we are a massive team. So discourse, we acknowledge, is a road less travelled. There's quite a bit out there for therapists and researchers about the word level, a little bit less, but still tools for the sentence level, but not so much about discourse. And when we embarked on this project, this was the status quo, that discourse, improving your discourse was an important outcome desired by people with aphasia and other key stakeholders, but very problematic to measure with an uncertain evidence base and demonstrated lack of generalization from the word and sentence level to discourse. And clinical practice was hindered by all of these lacks, which caused a real problem. And it was a space we wanted to step into with LUNA. So we were aware of the challenges when we set off, but we were like the brave girl in this picture. We were undeterred by the challenges and determined as a team to face them head on. So today, sorry, I was skipping ahead. Just to say that LUNA is very much grounded in the three pillars of evidence-based practice. So we acknowledge patient values, and the challenges inherent in the evidence base. We're drawing very strongly on clinical expertise. We'll tell you more about that, and the barriers that restrict the use of discourse in assessment and treatment practice. So today we're going to talk you through the 5 phases of Luna, and we really want to take you on the journey that we've been through from 2018 through to now. So there are 5 phases in the development of this project. We're going to run through the first 4 in the first half of the talk, and then we're going to spend the second half focusing on our phase 5, where we tested the Luna treatment. So starting with phase 1, I'm going to talk about how we reviewed the evidence base. And the thing we were trying to do here is to underpin what we were doing with a very strong foundation. There are 2 relevant papers that have been published. Here we have, on the left of the screen, we've got our review of the treatment evidence base. And then on the right of the screen, we reviewed some linguistic theories in order to create a theoretical framework for Luna. So I'm just going to very briefly run through those 2. So first of all, the review of the existing treatments. The first thing to say is that this hadn't been done before. Nobody had reviewed the whole of the treatment evidence base for discourse treatments. And what we found was quite a sparse evidence base relative to other reviews. We found only 25 relevant papers, which covered 127 participants. And we pulled all of this together to try and create a picture of what was already out there so that we could build on it for Luna. So I'm just going to run through 2 of the main things that we found. One was that discourse treatment isn't one single thing. So that term discourse treatment covers this whole range of different approaches. What they all have in common is that they're aiming to remediate at the discourse level, but their therapeutic activities happen at different levels. So there are lots of papers where most of the therapeutic activities happen at the word level, and then there's practice in discourse, and the treatment directed to the word levels is supposed to improve words in discourse. And so we found that for words. We found some papers targeting sentences, others working on whole aphasia scripts, some just working at the discourse macro structure, and then a few working at multiple levels. What united them all was that their therapeutic activity was aimed at discourse. So we kept the papers in these categories, and we looked at their efficacy data. We found that, so the green ticks indicate all of the different treatment types where words in discourse improved. So it seems that words are pretty resilient, no matter how you treat, no matter how you treat them, you get some beneficial effects at discourse level. We also found some papers where there were beneficial effects on sentences in discourse, but these were only where multiple levels were treated. And then finally, we found some papers where discourse macro structure improved. So these were either the papers where the macro structure was treated or the multiple level therapies. So what we got from this was that the most promising area in the development and the emerging evidence for discourse treatments is to treat at multiple levels, word and sentence and discourse. So this is moving on to our second review of the evidence base. Here we were looking at theories. So we searched the literature. We got some expert consensus on which theoretical papers we ought to be looking at, and we did some qualitative analysis to synthesize what we found. All of this fed into our theoretical framework, or model, if you like, which underpins Luna. So again, we're emphasizing the multiple levels, but actually we think of them as Russian dolls, as one aspect of language packaged inside another. So you have the linguistic component with all of the traditional treatments that you would expect in there. We also think it's important to think about propositions and how those show up in sentences. Then the macro structure planning, and then on top of this, something that was missing from the evidence base is the idea of pragmatics. So for example, thinking about your audience or the message that you want to convey when you're telling your story.
Okay, we're going to change now and go on to our next phase, which we started in August 2018. And that was really to tap into how our clinicians perceive what their skills are with respect to discourse analysis, how confident they feel, and what actual analyses they report they undertake. So this was a UK-wide study of speech and language therapists in any sector where they were practicing with clients or patients with aphasia. And we're really interested in what they felt about discourse, how feasible they thought it was, and also what their views were about what helped and hindered them to undertake discourse analysis in routine practice. As Lucy has said, we've published as we've gone along, so this is the paper that people can refer to read in more detail about our survey findings, because we're only sharing headlines here this morning, this afternoon and evening. We're really pleased by the size of the sample who volunteered for this study. So we have 211 complete responses from clinicians across the UK. You can see here the majority demographics, quite a spread in number of years of experience, and their main work settings were community, inpatient rehabilitation, and acute or subacute. It's really terrific to see that final setting involved here. So these are just some of our findings from the study that we wanted to share here, and it shapes the narrative that underpinned Luna. So what was terrific to see was that the majority of clinicians are using a standardized test to elicit discourse from clients with aphasia. But also we see that a fair proportion, 88%, also take a personal recount. These are quite standard things like, what did you do on Sunday? Tell me about your favorite holiday with family. Tell me what you used to do for work. So not necessarily a story framework. That's the positive findings. What you can see here in red are the ones that might worry us a little bit more. So fewer of them were able to record samples in practice, and there were several reasons for this. And only 5% regularly transcribe them. And so that makes it a bit of a challenge to keep data, say, for example, on where patients and clients start and how they might progress. Again, there are multiple reasons that this is difficult for clinicians. Most of our clinicians don't have a particular protocol or procedure to follow, and only 16% of them conduct detailed analyses. So it showed us that whilst there's real interest in the UK in this field, not all of our clinicians are able to really optimize what they'd like to do. This slide is a little busy. I think what we just wanted to point out to you is one of our most revealing questions in our survey was to invite clinicians to indicate which of these analyses they frequently or routinely undertook in clinical practice. And so the orange bars there represent the percentage of the sample. And you can see at the top here, word finding, word class, word errors, content information words really dominates the routine analysis practice of clinicians. We also asked clinicians to indicate which analyses they were more confident in, so these are the yellow bars, and which analyses they were least confident in. And it's interesting, and these are the blue bars. And what we can see here is that more clinicians find these aspects of discourse analysis really quite challenging. So story structure, cohesion of language, and then some other elements that relate to rate of speech and efficiency. But these are not surprising if you haven't been able to tape record your sample. What we also found was that the barriers for clinicians in the UK are the same as the studies that have already been published. So there was a lovely piece of work published by Miranda Rose and colleagues earlier, which highlighted some real challenges. And we see these same challenges here. So there's a lack of training, clinicians feel underconfident, there's no particular protocol, we don't really have a map to help us understand how to navigate this discourse sample that we've just collected, and people are under extreme time pressure, particularly in the NHS setting. And so these are barriers that we needed to be mindful of going forward, and developing a new intervention, which is not only a therapy, but also an analysis protocol as well. And the long-term goal of LUNA is implementation in the NHS, either in inpatient or the community setting. So we need to pay great attention to these. In January 2019, we'd completed our first 2 phases, and we used both of those new findings as well as existing findings to start developing LUNA. So this was a 6-month, quite intensive co-production phase, working with 2 teams. And our goal here really was to co-design a new clinical tool. And it's really 3 things. It's 3 packages in one. It's first of all a set of analyses that guide how to baseline the narrative and then how to extract treatment targets. The second package is a therapy package, so 10 weeks. And then the third is a set of outcome measures that are delivered pre and post treatment to capture change. Again, we've talked about our co-production paper. It's published in a special issue looking at patient and public involvement in aphasiology. And the whole of the issue is actually a very good read. So what did we do? This is just to help you imagine the space that we were in for 6 months. Is probably one of my most precious spaces in my working life. It was thoroughly delightful. So we met monthly with people with aphasia and talked through, discussed, debated, and then actually worked through activities at each of our 3 levels in our treatment. So looking at word, utterance, and macrostructure. We spent time discussing some of the very basic things, like what are the kinds of stories that we tell. So lots of discussion, lots of home practice, challenge tasks, giving our team of people with aphasia the opportunity to practice and then bring things back in so that it felt really live. And then we also had discussions about elements of LUNA that we had already done some work around, but really wanted to test out with people. So what do they think about a goals orientation to LUNA? Probably our most revealing activity with our people with aphasia was active experience. And this was actually practicing therapy activities in our co-design sessions, which lasted for a whole day at the university. And this is a recognizable video from the Caraher paper. This is the seaplane video used as one of the treatment stimuli. And we spent time mimicking that particular therapy activity and then unpacking what we thought about it. And there was great love for this particular approach to discourse macrostructure in our room. And this is an example of Lynn mimicking the plane. So they were very heavy sessions, very involved, very intense, and very revealing. We also worked fortnightly with our clinicians over the 6-month period, and our clinicians came from London and the South Coast and represented primarily community and also the inpatient setting. We all worked quite hard in those sessions. So what you're actually seeing here on the screen represents 12 hours of work. As a collaborative group, so myself, Lucy, and Madeline Pritchard, and our 4 clinicians, we worked through all the evidence base and knowledge sources that we had to work out what indicators we might possibly be able to use at the word level, the sentence level, and the discourse level. And so we looked both at what was available in the literature, what was available in our clinical expertise, and then we looked at measures that had arisen from our discourse treatment review that Lucy talked about beforehand to identify the best measures and take those into the protocol. This is just a bit of a sneak peek in case you don't fancy looking at the paper, but these were our 5 top areas of learning. So LUNA demonstrated the whole range of co-production. We arrived at much better joined up thinking, agreed decisions for assessment and treatment. Probably some of the best benefits were our treatment is highly personalized and highly meaningful and relevant now, both for the users who receive it and also for the providers, our clinicians who deliver it. There were lots of gains for our people with aphasia and speech and language therapists. There were a number of structures that we put in place to make sure that this was a really positive experience for our co-designers. And we all did agree it was time and labor intensive, but highly worthwhile. So we emerged around sort of July 2019 with sort of 3 phases under our belt, which was a really comfortable space to be in. However, we'd had the opportunity to do some rethinking in our grant, and we had a phase that particularly targeted clinicians. What we were really interested in is whether or not we could develop a training program that we could deliver to clinicians in a day, so it's very light or brief training, to see whether or not clinicians could emerge both efficient and accurate in the 6 key analyses that we wanted to pilot in our LUNA treatment, so in phase 5. And that's particularly important because there's often a question of whether or not discourse analysis is the skill set of a privileged few. We know it takes an extraordinary amount of time. We know you need to build skills to begin with in order to continue with it. And there was a real question from our funder, to what extent will therapists on the front line be able to do this in the future? So we needed to prove to them that in actual fact, we could do it without a doubt. So part of one of the conditions of the award was that we secured NHS support for this particular phase, because again, our funders were a little bit concerned about whether or not staff would be released. But we had an overwhelming response to this, both from clinicians and managers, which just signaled how much interest there was in discourse analysis in the UK. So just very briefly, I just wanted to say, I want you to imagine 30 people a day turned up in a room with Lucy, Maddie Pritchard and myself, and they received 6 hours of training, which included breaks. We ran with a model which went learn, practice, discuss, and then test. And we worked through each of the 6 analyses in exactly that order. We had one transcribed personal narrative from someone with aphasia, who was our training narrative, and then we had a separate test narrative. And so we're not looking at pre-post in our clinicians. We're just looking to see the extent to which clinicians can deliver this in a particular time frame and the extent to which they identify these particular analyses here compared to an expert or like a master analysis. So we looked at total words, narrative words, number of utterances, and whether or not those utterances were complete or incomplete. And then we looked at reference chains and story grammar elements for macrostructure. We recruited 58 out of our 60. You can see the demographics here of our clinicians. One of the really terrific things about the people who turned up for the training is that they weren't already converted to the dark side. These were clinicians who rarely or never collected discourse samples and did not feel confident in doing so. And it was just tremendous to have those people take part in this study. So main findings here. Well, we ended up with a clinically feasible training intervention. So we could deliver it in a day, we could get through all of the 6 analyses, and we could also make it efficient in the sense that clinicians on the whole were able to undertake the analyses in a timely manner. And in fact, on average, they were able to do the 6 analyses in a total of 49 minutes. This did, however, come at the expense of accuracy. So the training wasn't clear enough to help our clinicians appropriately identify utterances and reference chains. And so we need to do some more work on that with our intervention. What was terrific out of that particular space was very brief training on identifying story grammar elements, delivered really positive, accurate findings for clinicians. So that's definitely an area which seems very amenable to brief training.
Thank you, Madeline. Okay, so we're on to phase 5 where we tested the LUNA treatment. Just looking at the timeline there, you might realise, but I'll emphasise that just before we went into phase 5, the COVID pandemic struck, and the first UK national lockdown happened in March 2020. And so we very quickly had to flip our plans. We had plans to do the LUNA treatment face-to-face. but we had to flip online. So this meant that our assessment protocol had to flip completely online, and our treatment had to be delivered completely online. So there was some extra work in terms of setting that up. And so we put in some extra sessions, some getting to know you sessions with our participants, where we could also check their tech expertise and kind of walk them through what they would need in order to be able to participate over Zoom. And our participants came from a range of different backgrounds in terms of their tech capabilities. Some had never used Zoom before, but we had some really well spelt out protocols that were put in place by Kate Swinburne and our assessors Lynn and Carla to make sure people were safe and confident using Zoom and knew what to do if anything went wrong before we started. So our research questions for phase 5 are really about feasibility. So this is a feasibility trial, and the design is set up to explore that. So we're looking at the feasibility of recruitment and retention. We're looking at the feasibility and acceptability of our procedures. So that includes our personal narratives protocol, which is our assessment procedure for our primary outcome. It's looking at our assessment protocol more broadly. So we have some secondary outcomes as well, a language battery and some impact measures, and looking at the feasibility and acceptability of those online. So there was this additional aspect to our research question now. And of course, we were then also looking at the feasibility and acceptability of delivering LUNA treatment through Zoom. We're underpowered to detect change because this is a feasibility study, but we were also wanting to explore the data in terms of preliminary initial efficacy. We'd like to see some change. And we were looking at treatment fidelity. We had 3 SLTs delivering the treatment and a number of student speech and language therapists as well. So here's our study design. We had 28 participants, and our control was a waitlist control. So everybody did an assessment at time 1. They were then randomized to 2 groups. One group had their treatment immediately and the others waited. And then everybody was assessed again at time 2, again online. The first group then waited whilst the second group received therapy. Treatment was twice a week for an hour with a speech and language therapist. And then there was an hour's practice session with a student speech and language therapist. And so in total, this is 560 hours of treatment. So these are the timeframes for our testing points. You can see that this extends from almost the beginning of lockdown until March this year. And because of the 2 cohorts, we've got these different testing times for time 1 and time 2. Okay, so to the left of the screen, you can see our inclusion criteria. I'll just draw your attention to the fact that we screened using the FAST because we were looking for people with moderate and mild aphasia. And you can see that there's other inclusion criteria there. I'm not going to run through each of them, but you can ask about any of them afterwards. So the sample on the right of the screen tells you who we ended up with. So 28 people, 20 men, age range 34 to 83. And you can see various details about their living arrangements and their time post-stroke. I'm just going to emphasize the bits in bold. So we had 14 people with mild aphasia, 13 with moderate aphasia, and 1 with more severe aphasia. 23 of our participants lived outside London. So this was one of the silver linings to the COVID cloud, was that because we were remote, we could extend our recruitment zone more widely. And this was their range of experience with tech. You can see that less than half were very confident with tech, and about half had used Zoom, and about half had used therapy software before. And these were the range of ways at the bottom of the screen that they were accessing the LUNA treatment through their tablets, through a desktop, and through laptops. So this is our LUNA mission statement. We had a kind of texty version of this, but also this aphasia-friendly version so that people could really understand what Luna was about. So it's a new treatment for people with aphasia. It's going to help to improve your words and sentences and build them up into your own personal story. We wanted to emphasize that we're going to be working together as partners in this treatment. This was something that came out of our co-production phase. And what we were aiming to do was to give you some linguistic skills and some understanding to give you the confidence to tell your story in a way that shows who you really are. Okay, we're going to use Madeline's meringue analogy for how Luna works. So we start by asking people which story they would like to tell, which story they would like to work on. And this is our initial meringue. And then what we do is we deconstruct it. We take it apart. And we break it down into its components. So after the person tells their story the first time, the therapist does a bit of linguistic analysis to identify where the treatment, where the trouble spots seem to be and where the strengths are. So looking at words, looking at sentences, and looking at discourse macro structure to identify where the work needs to be done. And then this is discussed with the participants, and some goals are agreed for where treatment, how treatment will work. So during the therapy then, the idea is to be playful and flexible and to try different things out. So you might identify a trouble spot in terms, for example, of nouns. They might be a bit samey. So in the therapy space, the idea is that you play around with them. You try out different kinds of nouns, different kinds of expanded noun phrases or noun phrases that just have pronouns in, and see if you like it in your story. So this is the messy play space, and you try it out in various different ways, and then you select what you like best to put back into your story. You do this at all of the levels, word and sentence and macro structure, and you build it back up then into a different kind of meringue, one that looks different because of the treatment that you've been through. So it's personalized therapy because we start with a story that the person with aphasia has chosen and decided that they want to have treated. For the Luna project, the person told 2 stories, and one was treated and one was left untreated. So for the treated story, we took it apart, we did the linguistic analysis, and through that, the therapists decide on the treatment targets. So they find what kind of words ought to be used in the treatment activities, what kind of sentences to work on, and so on. So every time there was a therapeutic activity in Luna treatment, it was using words and structures from the person's own story. And so through that, we progressively rebuild the story, integrating all of these levels that we've identified through the review of the evidence base. So we're going back then to this idea of the Russian dolls. This is why we have word levels first in Luna treatment, then sentence level, using some of the words we've worked on, and then we take the sentences we've worked on, we put them into the discourse macro structure and work on them. So Russian dolls were important to us throughout. So keep this in mind when you're looking at the next screens. These are just examples of the kind of work therapists did after a person had told their story for the first time. So they color-coded word classes. So here you can see nouns in red, prepositions in blue, etc. And this helped the therapist see where there were a lot of words in a word class, where there were no words, or where there were error words. We also then broke the transcripts down into utterances so we could see what the utterance structure was like. And here we've got the verbs underlined and their arguments in square brackets so that we can see what the verb argument structure was like, and also get a feel for how complete or incomplete the utterances were. And then another aspect of analysis that our therapist did was to look at reference chains. This was an element of macro structure. So they would color code different reference chains to see whether they were complete, whether they were clear, and how many of them there were. Okay, so this is an overview of the 10 weeks of Luna treatment. You can see that there's an intro session, 3 word level sessions, 3 sentence level sessions, and 3 discourse macro structure sessions. And you can see each week there was a practice, there was a treatment session with the therapist, practice with the student, and then some challenge tasks for doing between sessions for the clients at home. I'm just going to show you a little bit about the therapy so that you can see what we did. There's no sound on these videos. I'm just going to talk over the top of them and we'll play just a little bit of them. So these are some examples of word level treatment. You'll see at the top of the screen that we were using semantic feature analysis. So this client's working on his hobby, hiking, and he's having trouble generating the people and objects involved in hiking. So the therapist is giving him a forced choice. Is it swimming trunks? Is it boots? And he's going to choose. Moving to the video at the bottom, another aspect of word level treatment was to go through the utterances in someone's story and give them a chance to add words. And you'll see here this particular client had a real absence of verbs in her story. So the therapist was working through seeing if she could generate some verbs when she looked at it again. Another thing we did at the word level was to expand phrases. So we'll start with a word and create expanded phrases. Okay, moving on to sentence level treatments. This is just an example of how we linked word and sentence together. So the top of the screen shows semantic feature analysis for the verb send, which this client had already worked on in a previous week. And then at the bottom of the screen, he's got a sentence frame with color-coded elements to help him map different aspects of the sentence into there. And he's generating language for the two red bits, the noun phrase, and then for the prepositional phrase at the end. And then finally, at the discourse macrostructure level, at the top of the screen, you can see that one of the things we worked on was story structure. So on the right of the screen, the therapist has got chunks of this client's story, and she's going to show him 3 screens, beginning, middle, and end. And in the beginning section, she's highlighting important things like the abstract, participants, and location. And he tells her which bits of his story to drag over and to put into those sections, and he can move them around and change his mind. Then finally, at the bottom of the screen, there's an example of treatment for reference chains. So this is another aspect of discourse macrostructure. And here we've got a chunk of the client's story, and the therapist has got 3 versions of a noun phrase at the top right of the screen, and she's moving them in and out. Do you want a simple noun phrase? Do you want the full noun phrase? Do you want the pronoun? And actually with this client, it took quite a bit of back and forward before she could decide what she wanted. So that was a really important part of treatment for her. Okay, just to give you a quick view of our primary assessment outcomes, and also, you know, to manage expectations, we don't have the outcomes for the group yet. We've just finished doing all of the discourse analysis literally Monday this week. But what we've just finished doing is some analyses at the word level. So we've looked at narrative words, CIUs, and word classes. At the sentence level, we've looked at completeness of utterances, and whether they're simple or multi-clause. We've looked at argument structure. And then in the red, in terms of discourse macrostructure, we've looked at story grammar and reference chains. We also have a listener judgment measure that we want to use at the end, just to see whether all of these measures are telling us something that then is reflected in what a listener hears. We talked in the co-production session about how much of these assessments were going to be feasible in the clinic. So that massive flowchart that you've just seen is really for our research protocol to test what's going on. But we don't expect that at the end of the day, this is what will happen in clinic. So we spoke to our SLTs about this, and we tried to identify an assessment at each of the levels that would be feasible to do in clinical practice. Okay, so this is a pre-treatment story from one of our participants, and he's talking about a particular hobby of his, and you'll see that there are some word level problems there. There's also sentence level problems which aren't immediately apparent, but when you do some of the analysis, you'll see that there's quite a lot, well, you won't see, our therapist saw, there's quite a lot of single argument sentences there, so it's quite restricted, and a lot of simple sentences rather than multi-clause ones. And there was some trouble with reference chains as well. If we flip to his post-treatment story, it goes over 2 screens. So you won't have time to read it all. So, I mean, one of the things you'll see is that it's longer, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But actually, listening to the story, it's much, much clearer, the message that he was trying to convey. You get much more about his personality. And in terms of our outcome measures, the percentage of language, which it was narrative, so percentage narrative words has increased. The percentage of complete utterances has increased quite a bit. There's also more multi-clauses there. There wasn't any change in his predicate argument structure in terms of the mean score, but there were some changes in terms of how many 2 arguments he used as compared to 1 argument. His story grammar was pretty similar, but there was a change in the number of well-formed reference chains he uses. So we're sorry you don't have time to read all of this. Okay, handing over to Maddie.
Okay, folks, this is the final section. We're going to share just some of the headline findings from fidelity, feasibility, and acceptability. So it was really quite important. You know, we have 3 therapists, 12 students delivering LUNA to 28 participants. So we manualized the treatment. We spent time working out what are the essential elements. And in fact, we started in our co-design sessions, both with therapists and people with aphasia, on working out what those are. And we developed our checklist. We trained our providers and also had weekly supervision. The student therapists who were working with us were on a placement, so a 15-week placement. And we also encouraged regular self-monitoring, so providers were assessing themselves against our 12-point checklist. How we actually assessed fidelity was to sample 10% of treatment videos, so 56 therapy videos, and then 4 of our lovely research students worked their way through this data, looking to see whether or not each of these items were present or absent in a LUNA session. And so you'll see a lovely heavy emphasis on things like partnership and collaboration, client involvement in decision-making. There's a big focus in LUNA on meta-awareness, both of meta-linguistic and meta-cognitive elements, strong personalization, some features that relate very much to LUNA, so working at different levels, working on both targets that come from the story and semantically or syntactically related structures that link to the story. And then the kinds of features that we would want around good practice, so feedback, responsiveness, etc. You'll see here also a final item 12 reflects the extent to which therapy has been followed in the manual. That's a bit of a catch-all, but it did include various aspects such as there needs to be progression in a particular session as one of the key features. So we've got really positive findings here, which basically say that as the rating team themselves were aligned with each other, we had very high adherence to the manual. So when we look at those 12 items across all 56 videos, 92% of those items are present and visible and demonstrable on video. We did find, I beg your pardon, a couple of items were a little bit problematic. This one here, item 8. Is a flag to us. It was only present in 32% of our session data. And that is not a problem per se. It's partly to do with how we've structured our therapy, particularly in the later stages of the therapy when there's 3 weeks of macro structure and people are practicing more of their own story rather than words and sentence structures that don't appear in their story. So we've given ourselves a little bit of a confound there that we just need to work through. We also found that our providers were beautifully embracing client-led and responsiveness, they sometimes had a lot of difficulty, I beg your pardon, the reverse, doing this, being client-led and being responsive, because they felt that they needed to follow the manual. So we need to spend a little bit of time working to see how we always accommodate that. And being a bit flexible on some aspects so that people don't need to feel so constrained. Moving on to feasibility, we had some very positive findings here again. So again, a feasibility study is basically about whether or not we can run this study before we scale it up and look to see whether or not it produces benefit for people, and where there's greater investment in research grants and greater investment in people's time. So you want to do it first of all to see whether or not people want to turn up and do this study, whether they stay the distance with you, and whether the kind of procedures that you've built your study around are actually feasible to undertake with the staff that you have. So you'll see here 86% of people stayed with us throughout the study. We had 4 people leave, but it was all due to ill health. In fact, we had one participant so keen that she was missing out on her week 10, her final session. She'd fallen over and broken her hip. She really wanted to do it from her rehabilitation bed in hospital. It was feasible. All of our participants were able to tell stories. They were able to choose 2 different stories. Stories on average were 9 minutes in length. You can see there's a bit of a range there though. It definitely, on average, we had enough words per se to undertake our discourse analysis. And in terms of our discourse outcome measures, our DOMs, each discourse outcome measure took on average 31 minutes. And so we had 6 of them built into the battery. These are being undertaken obviously by our skilled analysts, Lynn and Carla. A high proportion of participants can complete the schedule in 2 sessions, which is really important. And on average, assessment took 108 minutes. We were doing the assessments online. Our staff spent a significant amount of time thinking about our participant journey through assessment and making that as easy and seamless as possible. And this total is no different in terms of administration time as if you were doing it face-to-face. Moving on to acceptability, we're still doing some of our final analysis on participant views, but at the moment it's really clear that participants found the assessment demands acceptable. They particularly liked the personal narrative element of it, and they see doing the other assessments, the secondary outcome measures, as kind of like part and parcel of what you need to do. We've got negligible missing data. We have a similar very positive experience of sessions attended as planned. So again, we wanted to be a bit brutal in how we assessed ourselves. And so we checked first of all to see whether or not people could attend the sessions, and then counted when people needed to rearrange things or if we had technical issues. And we had a very high proportion of participants completing the majority of the treatment sessions. We just wanted to leave you with some words from one of our lovely participants. He's talking on various aspects of his therapy.
It was great. Honestly, it was the best thing ever, because it's my speech. My speech at the beginning was not as good to the end. It was brilliant, really good, really good. It was more stop-start, I think. And I don't think I really told it. I think that was it. I didn't get out there willing to speak much, because from the beginning, I think I was not down, a little bit down, because I couldn't get talking anymore. So the more I've got able to speak and get them talking, and that it's really good. So yeah, getting my story to the end, it was really good, because I basically changed it all. I don't know, it just came, it flowed by the end of it. Really nice. you don't say to people, oh, I know the beginning, the middle and the end. It's just, that's natural, and it becomes natural the more you do. So you don't even have to think about it, you just say it and get on with it.
Some of the really lovely elements that this participant is sharing is how his story flows more, which is actually one of the key goals of Luna. And he's really internalized the story grammar structure that he learned. So where are we going? We're spending more time looking at our primary and secondary outcome measure data. We're spending a little bit of time polishing up our qualitative findings, and we'll be running more dissemination events next year. So please stay in touch. We'd love to hear from people. So email us, join us on Twitter, sign up to our blog so that you can receive regular updates, and please feel free to download resources from the Cara Hub. Thank you. Thank
you so much, Madeline and Lucy. It's the first time I've heard the Luna story sort of start to finish, and I got to say it's pretty exciting. It's very well conceived, you know, from that early phase and the consultation and the co-design and the endpoint in mind the whole way. So yeah, I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone when I say it's very impressive. If you have a question, please pop it in that Q&A box and I will start going through them now if you've got a few minutes. So Erica Mangialardi asks, what were the 6 types of analysis you taught during the narrative training for SLTs?
Lucy, or do you want me to do it? The 6 types of analysis?
No.
Or do you want to...
I'll try and remember, and then you can correct me. We taught narrative words. Did we do CIUs as well? No, I can't remember what else we did at word level. So at word level, we did narrative words, total words and narrative words. And then we did number of utterances and completeness of utterances at the sentence level. And then we did story grammar and reference chains at macrostructure level. And these were the ones that we thought might be the most clinically feasible, which is why we selected those 6 from the bigger package.
In terms of ease and the time it takes? Or?
Yes, yeah, both of those things. We knew that CIU analysis is very popular and very robust psychometrically, more popular in the States perhaps than in other countries. But when we had shown clinicians in the UK the protocol, they found it very off-putting. And so one of the things we're trying to do in Luna is to see whether the narrative word measure and the CIU measure correlate at all, because we think the narrative word protocol is slightly simpler.
Next question is from Smruti Venkat. Did each person with aphasia undergo different interventions based on their requirements at word, sentence and discourse levels? Did they take place in a hierarchy?
That's a really lovely question. You've always got this tension, haven't you, in a treatment grant of needing to deliver the same kind of intervention. So one of the unique things about Luna is it's essentially the same package, the same number of weeks of word level input, same number of utterance level, same number of discourse macro structure. And also there are the same therapy approaches that are delivered and the same challenge tasks. So things to get to people, to help people link it into their everyday life. But then you kind of take that and you turn it on its head and it's completely personalized. So all of the targets, either at word level or at kind of like utterance level, looking at people's structures, all of those targets are entirely linked to the person in front of us. So it's a strange mix of a bit of both.
Probably a good mix. Are those different levels treated sequentially or in parallel across? Sequentially?
Sequentially from words through sentences to macrostructure and up.
Yep.
And that's a really interesting point because I think the Russian doll analogy for me works. You know, when we tell a story, you've got this massive story, but then it's deconstructed into propositions, and then each of those propositions have got utterances, and each of those utterances have got words that sit within them. And so even though it's sequential, and even though we start at the word level, all of those words are taken from the story. So they've always got their eye on where they're going, and they're treated sort of in this increasing, like, you know, that little nesting doll structure. They're treated in the context in which they're used in the person's story. So even though it's sequential, it always sits within this growing context that is relevant to the person's story. So it's at word, but it's also discourse, at utterance, also discourse.
So it starts with the biggest doll in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question is from Maya Menahimi-Falkov. Thank you for the fascinating talk. I'm curious if you have any preliminary maintenance results following this promising treatment.
We have only just finished on Monday the final inter-rater reliability on our final discourse analysis, and obviously the magic, or where we're hoping to see the magic, is in you know, people's individual discourse changes. We've got we've also looked at some secondary outcome measures. And for half of the cohort in the sample, we do have a maintenance follow-up. So for 14 of the 28 people, there is maintenance. We haven't done any analysis as yet, but certainly the ethos of both Lucy and I is we're always wanting provocative change. We're looking for change that hopefully will generalize. So there's a treated story and an untreated story in the assessment battery. So we're looking for generalization across to there, and we're looking as much as possible for maintenance.
I think I would add there that kind of the history of treatment studies in aphasia has shown us that we're foolish to expect group level change. That's not the way treatment research is panning out, but what we're hoping for is, you know, individual change, to be able to explore down to the individual level and see it working for some people in different ways, and to different levels, and to work out who it works best for. That's part of the feasibility of what we're looking for.
I suppose because it's personally relevant stories, hopefully they're using them in, you know, daily life, and that should help.
Yeah.
Have you got time for a couple more questions? We are a little bit over time, but yep.
We have, if you guys have.
Robin Gibson's asking, this has clearly been an enormous project over several years now. What have you enjoyed most about the Luna project?
Maddie, do you want to go first?
Oh, I have to say my favourite bit is the co-production phase. Oh, it's hard actually. It's actually so hard to choose. Probably phase 3, 4, and 5. I think the element for me is the collaboration with clinicians and people with aphasia. You know, I've been practicing for almost 20 years, and we had such a safe space, and clinicians and people told us what they thought about previous therapy, what they loved about it, what they hated. We learned things that, you know, you normally wouldn't have time for in a therapy space. So that lovely collaboration with everyone at the table, I think, is what nailed it for me. And then we saw it again in phase 4. You know, I loved being in the training room. Lots of clinicians had light bulbs going off in their heads and were realizing things. So it's again that kind of buzz of feeling like you're close to something, which is, you know, people really want to work on. So it's a collaborative endeavor. And then we spent a lot of time in supervision in the last 12 months with therapists and students. And so again, that kind of, you know, there's collaboration between them and the client, but then there's collaboration between us and them, you know, everyone kind of working together.
I would agree. It's that collaboration, and for me, you know, this started as a small idea cooked up by Maddie and I in a cafe in Melbourne, actually, during IARC, 2016, no, earlier than that, I can't remember, but anyway. 2012, right. We were just discussing what we thought would make a great therapy, and it kind of unites my linguistic background and Maddie's interest in quality of life and impact and participation. And we literally sketched this idea on the back of our receipt in the coffee shop, and Maddie's still got that receipt. But for me then, the collaboration and the co-production throughout kind of validated lots of things we had been thinking about when we wrote on the back of that receipt. This idea of metalinguistic awareness and metacognitive, this idea of working in partnership with people with aphasia, but using some of your impairment-based linguistic terminology and saying, you know, this is a noun phrase, let's play around with it. that sounded like a crazy idea in that cafe in Melbourne. Maddie thought it was a good idea, but I wasn't so sure that the rest of the world would be interested. But then to hear the validation coming from clinicians and people with aphasia saying, no, I would really like to do that. And then to see it play out in the therapy and to see the therapists learn and grow and bring their own ideas to the table, and to see people with aphasia kind of running with the idea, it's just been wonderful.
And I'm going to say that the wonderful Melbourne coffee was part of it then, and an important part of it.
We think so.
Absolutely. For all the Melbourners on the call, it was Brunetti's, the fabulous Italian place.
All right, 2 more quick questions and then I'll introduce next month's seminar. Smriti is asking, if it was sequential, did you not have people progressing at different rates, considering the number of sessions were the same at each level?
That's such
I guess the short answer is no, because we had to keep it the same for the research, but that was a tension that the therapist identified. So, if and when Luna gets into clinical practice, we expect that will change and there'll be more flexibility, because the 3 levels are there, but different people might need different times at different levels. But for the research protocol, we couldn't do that.
And there is some evidence in the qualitative data. There's a few participants in the sample who said, oh, actually, I would have liked a bit longer on this. And as somebody who's been in touch with therapists and students, I could concur, this person needed more at the word level, or they needed something a little bit different. What is fascinating in the qualitative data is everyone's got an opinion about what they would like more or less of, and there's absolutely no pattern as well. So there's something here about, as a therapist, we might look at progression, but actually it's about checking in with that person. So some people were happy to sit in a space where they were doing really well, and others were going, move me on, I want to get to the next bit. Yeah.
Okay, last question from Katarina Breitenstein. Thank you for this fantastic talk. The ANALTS uses an intuitive rating procedure in which assessors evaluate on a 5-level Likert scale how appropriate are given responses from a pragmatic communicative perspective for a particular everyday life scenario. Does Luna's listeners rating scale comprise a comparable general rating of communicative pragmatic competence, independent of linguistic completeness of the produced stories?
Good question.
Tough one for you, the last one.
No, it's really good. We'll be brutally honest. There's no point pretending. We've had some initial discussion about what scale we'll use for this. And it's really, really important to our clinicians on the ground. It's something that came through on the survey that kind of general listener judgment is what we're guided by. And that's what we're working towards. We had a look at a couple of tools. I will confess we didn't look at the ANALT, so that's a really good suggestion. And we haven't been able to settle on one yet. We had quite a lot of debate about what we really should do.
But that broad answer is yes, it will be separate from any of those linguistic measures. It will be, much more socially valid. It will be, what's your judgment of this discourse? Was it easy to listen to? Did you understand it? That kind of thing. It will be separate from anything to do with linguistic completeness or complexity.
Well, thank you again for your time presenting and then answering questions. For our next seminar, we're very lucky to welcome Dr. Brooke Ryan. She'll be speaking about family-focused management of people with aphasia who have children. And this seminar will be at 4 to 5 p.m. Melbourne time and 1 p.m. Western Australia time. And if this is not translate to a good time for where you live, the recording will be available on our website. So once again, I'd just like to thank Madeline and Lucy, and we look forward to seeing everyone next month. Thanks very much.